everyone. We're excited to have you join us for our August Community Check-in. I'm Mina Kim. I'm Program Officer for the Community Initiative, and I am here with my team members, our Program Manager, Lisa Simmons, our Cultural Districts Manager, Luis Cotto, and Program Officers, Timothy Afan, Ricky Guillaume, and Veronica Ramirez Martel. Together, we comprise the Community Initiative, and we work in various regions all across the state. Today, we have an exciting program for you. We're going to discuss community engagement, which is so important to creating spaces that are relevant and meaningful to folks who live in those spaces. And so in terms of the agenda, we're going to start off with arts and culture advocacy updates from Emily Reddick, Executive Director of MASSCreative. We also will have Cynthia Espinosa, Senior Project Manager at the Office of Planning and Economic Development for the City of Holyoke, and Shey Rivera Rios, Artist and Cultural Strategist, talk about El Corazon, the heart of Holyoke, a new creative placemaking project in the city. We also have with us Denise Gaffey, who is Director in City Planning for the Office of Planning and Community Development at the City of Melrose, and Kris Rodolico, Executive Director of Follow Your Art Community Studios, who will talk about a new wayfinding and creative placemaking initiative in Melrose. And then we will have Marquise Victor, who is Founding Executive Director of Elevated Thought, Nate Robertson, Community and Economic Development Planner for the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, and Karen Ristoven, who is Program Director of the Creative County Initiative at the Essex County Community Foundation, talk about a regional cultural asset mapping project called Merrimack Valley Place and Meaning 2020. So just a reminder for the speakers, Luis Cotto will be the timekeeper. He'll provide a 5-minute warning and a 1-minute warning, just so you know. And in terms of Q&A, if attendees could put in your questions into the Q&A box, that would be wonderful. And depending on time, we'll either be able to share those questions with our guest speakers in between the sessions or at the end of everyone's presentations. So Emily, would you like to start?
I would, and I'm going to share my screen. One moment. I just got off another meeting with Karen and Marquise, so this is great. It's nice to have the energy from that meeting flow into this one. So thank you so much for the time, Mass Cultural Council's communities team, and all of you for joining me. So we're going to talk about a couple of things today. I just want to give you sort of like the lay of the land and a little bit of an update on some federal work and some state work, and then think about ways to engage and advocate. The first thing I'm going to talk about is that last week, oh, look at this chart. Last week, the Senate released the HEALS Act. And this is the response, this is the 4th stimulus bill response to the HEROES Act that the House passed in May. And so this chart, I think, is a really handy dandy way of comparing the HEROES Act to the HEALS Act. I think the big thing that this chart doesn't tell you is that the HEROES Act was a $3 trillion spending plan, and the HEALS Act is a 1.5. There's some interesting comparisons, right? Like, so the HEROES Act is really focused in on state and local funding, whereas the HEALS Act does not provide that kind of state and local funding. There's also the issue of support for arts and cultural specific agencies. So in the HEROES Act, there's money provided for the NEA, the NEH, and IMLS. In the HEALS Act, there is a lot of money provided for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. So this chart is actually available on our website, and I'll send that later. And Mina, I'm sure you can forward this along to everyone on the call. But the big thing is that neither of these bills is going to be the bill that's passed as the fourth stimulus bill. These are in a lot of ways like the position, like the entering negotiation positions for both the Democrats, which lead the House, and the GOP, which leads the Senate. And so what I would suggest, or what I'm going to encourage you all to do today, is to engage with our members of Congress and our state senator, or excuse me, our U.S. senators through this Americans for the Arts Action email. That is created, that talks about the really good things that are in the HEROES Act and asks and requests that those things be included in whatever the final version of the HEALS Act or the final version of that stimulus bill would be. And so again, the last time we saw a stimulus bill, it was the CARES Act, right? That provided direct NEA grants to places like the Mass Cultural Council, as well as arts and cultural organizations were able to could apply directly to the NEA. It also provided the pandemic unemployment assistance, which meant that independent and individual contractors were able to apply and get unemployment assistance, as well as create the federal unemployment assistance compensation, which was that additional amount that the federal government was adding to state unemployment for people who were claiming unemployment. So that, interestingly enough, actually ended last week. And so we are now witnessing a lot of people in our sector who have just saw a really intense pay cut from one they already took when they were either laid off and furloughed. So there's a real need to make sure that whatever the fourth stimulus bill that is passed addresses that issue as well. The other two things that I want to talk about that are important pieces of federal legislation are the Restart Act, which you can see listed here. There's a number of different provisions. The Restart Act and the Save Our Stages Act are really focused around live performance venues that are completely unable to open right now because of the pandemic. So the other one is Save Our Stages Act, that again provides assistance, and this is actually to both for-profit and not-for-profit entities. So the National Independent Venues Association has actually taken a lead role in both of these pieces of legislation, and I would encourage you to check them out. I think they're a really great resource. I know many of us in our communities have live performance venues that are either run as nonprofits or run by our municipal government, or our for-profit entities that are part of the rich and vibrant creative and cultural lives of our downtowns. And so we want to make sure that we're thinking about protecting all of us in that moment. So those actions are there. Now I'm going to take a look, and we're going to talk really quickly about the state. So I'm sure many of you have noted that there's been a slight increase of cases of COVID-19 in Massachusetts. And that 2 weeks ago, Baker imposed travel restrictions for out-of-state travelers into Massachusetts as a way to sort of try to protect. Last Friday, he released the Mask Up MA campaign. And this is another place in terms of thinking about community action where I would say, like, we have a role to play in this. So our arts and cultural community and vibrancy has been paused in some ways in terms of our in-person actions because we're not able to, because of the cases, right, and the reopening plan. And so if we want to see phased approach that Baker administration has been working off of and that many of our municipalities have been working off of continue, we need to make sure that people are adhering to proper public health guidelines, including wearing masks. So the Mask Up MA campaign, I think, is one that I would encourage you, if you have social media platforms, to take advantage of and to promote. The other sort of big headline, right, that's happening in the state is that for the first time since the mid-90s, the legislature, both the House and the Senate, agreed to extend formal session through the end of the year. So just really quickly, I promise the civics lesson will be super brief. We work on a 2-year legislative cycle. So for when legislators are elected, it's for 2 years, and the legislative session starts in year 1 and it in January, and it ends in year 2 in December. But though it's a full-time, 2-year legislative cycle in a full-time legislature, there are periods of higher activity and lower activity. And so one of those big pieces of activity actually was supposed to end on July 31st, right? So that was the day when the deadline through which formal sessions were allowed, right? So, and that's when you want to do a formal session when you've got either a big bill or a controversial bill that you want all the legislators paying attention to and being in the room for. And so that was supposed to happen on July 31st. And that, again, is usually when we as a community are sort of really, really paying attention to the state budget. But that didn't happen this year. And so, sorry, and then so normally after the 31st, they go into informal session until December 31st. And they continue to do bills and work on the business of the legislature, but it's not those sort of big bills or the state budget that we're always paying attention to. But because of COVID-19, the way the legislature has had to reorganize their work, the way that we are all responding to this crisis and working to take care of our communities, they've actually agreed to extend formal session. And so what we would have seen where like there'd be a crush on July 31st, where a bunch of bills would be like debated really late into the night, just didn't happen. And the legislature, it seems to have moved into a little bit of a pause for the month of August, or for part of August, while some conference committees do their work to reconcile the two versions of House and Senate bills, and legislators go back to campaign for re-election for a little bit before they return. And the expectation is they're going to return in September, and they are going to work really hard from September through December to continue to work on the legislation and taking care of our communities. So let me talk to you about some support for the arts and cultural community that the legislature is working on. So the last 2 weeks, I'm sure you've received communication from me, from the MASSCreative, and me from the Mass Cultural Council around an act for enabling partnerships for growth. This is an economic bond bill. And so every 2 years, the legislature does an economic development bond bill. Bond bills are a little bit different than state revenue bills, right? So bond bills basically says, the legislature says, we're going to sell bills, right? And we're going to raise the money, and we're going to authorize what that money is raised for to spend on these things. And they instruct the governor or authorize the governor to spend that money. But so in I would say not a particularly flattering way, some people say it's like, oh, it's the allowance, right? But like an allowance or like an authorized spending plan, the Baker administration doesn't have to spend all of that money, and the money also has to be raised. So that's why a bond bill is different than a state revenue bill, state budget bill. But there were some really, really important provisions for the arts and cultural community included in this bond bill. In the House, there was $11 million included in two different funds, one to promote and connect artists and arts and cultural organizations to their audiences virtually, and $5 million for to connect school groups and students to arts and cultural experiences virtually. The other thing the House did is they instructed that there be a commission to make recommendations for sector recovery and study what's needed. And that's a really important piece. If you take a look, actually, the restaurant industry got a very similar commission before a number of pieces of legislation were passed in the legislature earlier 2 months ago about that. On the Senate side, they included $2 million authorized to spend for arts and cultural recovery due to COVID-19. This is a really, really great sign that our collective advocacy work, the time we take to reach out to lawmakers, the time we take to tell our stories about our importance to our communities, about the impact that we're having, about the impact that the COVID-19 and the economic crisis has had on us as a sector, is being heard by legislators and is making a difference. So I want to just pause and thank everyone on this call who reached out to a legislator to talk about these issues. You made the difference, and that is why we are seeing these pieces being included. So the bills, the two versions of the bill were passed by the legislature, and now they go into what's called conference committee, and that's where the House and the Senate appoint members to negotiate the differences between the two bills. And the action that I'd like to ask you to take today is to write your legislators and urge them to adopt issues on the conference committee. On the House side, it's Representative who's chair of House Ways and Means. It's also Representative Anne-Margaret Ferrante, who is chair of Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, and Representative Donald Wong, who is the ranking minority member on the Economic Development and Emerging Technologies Committee. On the Senate side, it's it's Senator Michael Rodrigues, who is chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. It is Senator Eric Lesser, who is the chair of Economic Development and Emerging Technologies, and it is Senator Patrick O'Connor, who's the ranking minority on Economic Development and Emerging Technologies. Senator Lesser is a former chair of the Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development Committee. This is great news. Representative Anne Margaret Ferrante has filed several pieces of legislation that support and encourage a thriving creative economy. Senator Patrick O'Connor actually filed an amendment that was adopted in another spending bill, that was an actual spending bill, to appropriate $2 million for small arts and cultural organizations to get COVID relief. So we've got some champions on that conference committee and folks who want to hear from us. So I want to encourage you to take on and write your legislators. Then I just want to make I'm just trying to clock and make sure that I'm not going over time. Okay. Okay, so here are some things that I want to just share with you. So here's some tips in terms of how to do advocacy and think about it, right? And so we've asked you to do a lot of different calls and emails over the last couple of weeks, and they do make a difference. And here are some tips. Make it personal. As I said before, when we're talking about the impact that we're having on our communities, the value of the arts and cultural community to our neighborhoods, it matters. When we also talk about what's happened since the outbreak of COVID-19, what's happened since the renewed and long overdue calls for broader support for Black Lives Matter. Those stories matter, and we need to make those stories personal when we're talking with decision makers. I also want to share some really good pieces of info that will help inform your conversations that you have. So the Mass Cultural Council released their survey findings from that COVID-19 impact survey. That is chock full of incredibly important data to share. I also included a link to our the testimony we gave during a Senate listening session that talks about not just the economic value of the arts and cultural community, but the community cohesion value. How are we taking care of people in this particular moment in time? And then Brian Boyles, who's the executive director of Mass Humanities, wrote a really wonderful piece that was published in Commonwealth magazine about why the humanities and culture must be part of pandemic healing. So the other thing I just want to say right now is that your networks and your relationships matter. So as an example, the Huntington Theater, which is based in Boston, they asked if they could share an action alert with their audiences. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And this was when we were still working on the Economic Development Bond Bill. So they shared one of our action alerts. Here's what happened. The day we had that action alert going, and I can track and see who's emailing their legislators through the system that we have. The day before, the hour after that email went out from the Huntington Theater, the number of people who started to take action started to double. And in fact, they doubled the impact of that email thanks to, or that communication out to legislators thanks to that email. And sure, the Huntington Theater, I'm sure, has a very large email list, but we all have contacts and relationships that matter in this conversation. And sharing and engaging your communities, your family and your friends and saying, this matters to me, and I hope you'll take action and encourage encourage your lawmakers to make this a priority is what we really need right now. So finally, and not finally, but I just really want to say the fiscal 21 budget, which for many cultural councils is a place where you are doing your funding and your grant making. The reality is that is not on the same schedule. So on Monday, Baker signed a 3-month spending bill that will keep funds level and just keep business, the government business going for the next 3 months. But the legislature, that's one of the things they're going to start working on once they come back in September, and they're going to be working really hard to finish that up. There will be a lot of advocacy that we will all need to do around that state budget to protect as much public investment and public spending in the arts and cultural sector as we need. And so I just want to put that as a preview for what's ahead. All right, thank
Emily,
you.
just the 30. Oh, great. Thank you, Emily. Thanks so much for the updates and for giving us the civic lesson, because it's really important to understand how these processes work so we can influence them. And Emily, you actually have another update coming up this Friday, correct? And we'll put information about the updates that Emily and MASSCreative provide every other Friday, I believe, in our chat. So next up, I'd like to welcome Cynthia and Shey to talk about some of the community engagement initiatives taking place in Holyoke.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again for inviting us to be part of this panel and listen to the great work that everybody's doing. So my name is Cynthia Espinosa. As Nina mentioned, Senior Project Manager for the City of Holyoke. I'm very excited to be here to share about our creative placemaking project called El Corazón, the Heart of Holyoke. Nina, do you still have sort of the documents that I sent? Are you able to share the screen, if you don't mind?
Sure, let me pull them up.
Thank you. Just wanted to give you all sort of a sense of why you do that. Just for those who don't know where Holyoke is located, we're in Western Massachusetts. We are a small city compared to other ones. Gateway City, about 40 to 42,000 residents. About 48% of our residents identify as Latinx. And within those 48, 95% identify as Puerto Rican. So I'm giving you that context because the project really is focusing on that 95% population. So the Heart of Holyoke started about 4 years ago. The city have partnered with the Community Design Engagement, which is a nonprofit that helps with creative placemaking throughout Western Mass and has done some work in Holyoke. With the idea that we wanted to do an art park underneath I-391, which is underneath the highway. We did get funding from the National Endowment of the Arts, the Our Child grant. It's coming out soon, I know, so many organizations might be applying for it. So that's why I mentioned it. And the goal was to do a planning project of this art park underneath the highway. Things happen, you know, when you work in community, and I think this is a way that we started right away with community engagement. Our plan kind of went, you know, out of the window, and we had to redo our plan. One of it, and then for very good reasons. One of it, the ward counselor located in that area where 391 is on Main Street in Holyoke, where the project is focused, filed a Puerto Rican cultural area designation for Main Street. Because the Main Street has two neighborhoods, one called South Holyoke, one called the Flats, in which the majority of the residents identify as Puerto Rican. And for over 40 years, a nonprofit organization called Nueva Esperanza has been doing a lot of cultural and arts related work. From murals to festivals to theater to a little bit of everything that you can call it. So they, you know, we have approached them, you know, in the beginning, and they really became a key partner for El Corazón project. Even the name is new because before it was 391 Art Park, and then it shifted to El Corazón, of Corazón de Holyoke. So from there, we then decided instead of focusing just on the highway, we're gonna focus on all Main Street to cover both neighborhoods and engage all the residents. So you kind of see some images of the work that we've done and all the cultural work that has been happening on Main Street, from events to live music to murals. Can you click on the next one? Oh. So for 2 years, we did a lot of relationship building. And when you engage with the community, relationship building is key, and it takes a lot of time, and it's continuous. So that's sort of some process. So about 2 years, you know, we were all coming together. We were engaging residents, partners, businesses, agencies all along Main Street. And we did a community survey to really find out more what the residents thought about culture and art for Holyoke. If you can zoom in a little bit, I just wanted to highlight the middle part. I'm not sure if people have a little bit of hard time seeing it. So I do recall one of the questions was sort of what kind of arts or things you would like to see? Oh. I don't know.
Sorry, I'm trying to zoom.
That's okay. Let me see. I can see it on my end and I can just say it. Apologies. Technology. Yeah, so what would be some activities that will make the neighborhood more Puerto Rican or more cultural, and arts festivals and anything related to arts and culture was pretty much highlighted as the top priority. So that really helped us identify what to do next. If you go to the next slide, or the next page. So then from all of the data from the survey, community meetings we had as part of those 2 years that we had engagement before the survey, we created an advisory board in which right now a lot of residents, organizations on Main Street and businesses sit on. And at the beginning, we had a lot of engagement. Right now, we had about maybe 30 or so people on the board. Right now, we have about 18 on our list that are, and maybe within those 18, about 8 are really active. The other ones come, they join us as they can. So that's also part of community engagement and being flexible to have people come in and out, depending. So the reason we're showing this map is this is actually our first ever project plan related to arts and culture in the city of Holyoke. It's very exciting. It's really focusing on Main Street to do different art installations in many different ways. And this is far from final. Definitely we can adjust, and many other artists and groups and projects can add more to that. But the focus is really to see Main Street as a gateway to the Puerto Rican culture area as it's been assigned. So I want to appreciate and give a shout out to Mass Cultural Council for putting our vintage towers at the beginning of the slide. So we have some gate markers for electrical vintage towers at both ends of the street, which we are currently working on doing some illumination, artistic lighting, and also some potential metal mesh art installation on them to really invite folks into there. Some of the projects that we're looking to install are building wraps, some murals, some large-scale photos, and also some temporary, pavilions, temporary or as possible pavilions that people can, where we identify locations where a lot of the community members already come together. There's a hot dog cart on the corner of Main and Spring that the hot dog guy, he sells pretty good, but then a lot of people come together and play dominoes and just comes together. So we design a pavilion and where people can be under, to protect from weather, but also it can be a location for some art installation. And we identify other ones around. So thanks to the Holyoke Local Cultural Council, Mass Development, Commonwealth Places Grant, where we did crowdfunding. If you go to the next one, we were able to get some funding to do our first art installation. And here you can see some more of the pictures of the ideas. So the middle one is the pavilion that I was mentioning, and that's the hot dog guy on the back.
Cynthia.
Yes.
We do have a question from someone asking about how the surveys were distributed.
Yeah.
And
So
if you worked with different partners to reach different parts of the community.
Yes, we work. The city worked specifically with No Esperanza, one of the nonprofits. Actually, the one that is on the second bottom right that has a Puerto Rican flag there. That's sort of the building. They're located right on South Holyoke. So we partner with them to help us distribute and do door knocking to residents. During events, we had tables and attended. And also, believe there were some online, but most of it was actually by paper back in 2018, you know, before COVID and when we had that. It's kind of hard to imagine it again. So that's how it happened. And it took a couple of months to sort of do that process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah. So these are some of the projects, and I had mentioned the towers you can see on the left side. Other ideas are within fences to do some art installations. And there's also a good amount of billboards that we're looking to include some photographs there. And then the next one, so we did get, again, with the funding that we received last year, if you can go to the next slide. We were able to get funding to do our first installation of banners throughout Main Street. We did our first installation, we're looking to do it more. We installed 24 banners that includes what is called Hidden Legends of Holyoke. And Hidden Legends of Holyoke are residents of Holyoke who were identified by the Holyoke High School Restorative, Balante Restorative Justice Group. They created a project in which they wanted to create a Hall of Fame in their high school, because the current Hall of Fame that they had did not have any people of color or any representation or anybody that looked like themselves. So they created their own. For many months, they researched all of the history of Holyoke, of all the sort of like leaders, change makers, agents of change, you know, all those that you want to call, that live in Holyoke and what they have done. They had a tedious process, you know, they identified more and then they brought it down to 25 of them. And so we have installed those as the first initial one. So the one on the left is Maria Salgado, Cartagena Salgado, who's been a Holyoke Puerto Rican historian for many years, and a big advocate for youth and restorative justice there. Isael Rivera, he's a great advocate in the flats and in a youth, working a lot with the youth in Holyoke. Betty Medina Lichtenstein, which is the top right, is the executive director for Enlace de Familias, a nonprofit, really helping families with any resources when it comes to their families, from food to court hearings or anything like that. And they've been doing incredible work for over 30 years. Then underneath Betty, we have Norma, who she is a dance instructor for Bomba. Bomba is a typical sort of folklore, I think I'm saying it right, dance for Puerto Rico. And then Teresa Cooper-Guden has been doing a lot of housing rights advocacy in Holyoke. And finally, underneath Izzy, we have the legend of Carlos Vega, which is pretty known in Holyoke. He was one of the co-founders of Nueva Esperanza, along with Silvia Robelo. Sorry, I'm getting it 5 minutes. And they've been really, Nueva Esperanza was sort of the home of many of these people that you see on the banners, and also the other organizations there. So this was the first installation, and then now we're looking at a second phase of installation, which I'll let Shey talk more about.
Great, thank you, Cynthia. Hi, everyone, I'm Shey Rivera Rios, Boricua, born and raised, been living in Providence, Rhode Island for 10 years and collaborating in Holyoke for a while now. So it's really exciting to be part of this project. I'm the lead artist, invited in by the advisory committee of El Corazon. So like Cynthia mentioned, Holyoke has the largest Puerto Rican population per capita of any city of the US outside of the island of Puerto Rico. So this is why this designation of a cultural area, a Puerto Rican cultural area, is so important to honor the legacy of place in the city. So this new phase of public art the committee invited me in to also add in a process of mentorship to pump up the power of these emerging artists that are in Holyoke and really like workshop their craft, help them scale up their work, and like, you know, the advisory committee investing in this new cohort of artists. So if, you know, what Cynthia showed us was like a layout of the different kinds of public art that we're commissioning. For this phase, we have a public photograph banners project. So we selected about 4 photographers locally. Their experiences vary. We have from professional photographers to very emerging photographers, which makes for a really great mix of folks. The other piece is a panel mural project, and we found a spectacular artist. He works very underground and uses mixed media, collage, and drawing, and does these really beautiful, complicated pieces. So he's gonna be commissioned to create this large scale work. It's about 12 panels. And then I'm stepping in. I was invited and commissioned to create a series of storefront pieces with my mixed media work. And I'm working with 4 local artists from Holyoke that have a visual art practice to think about how to create installation work out of their visual art. So we have these 3 different phases of engagement with the artists. And we also picked 3 artists to lead community workshops because they have a strong muscle with community engagement. So those are some of the things that we've been doing. We just closed our process and are announcing the artists, giving people some really great news that they're gonna be contributors in this project. And it's just really exciting. It's Puerto Rican led, Puerto Rican artists getting resources and access to upskill and expand their creative practice. So yeah, that's what we got. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cynthia and Shey. I do want to go back to something that you said, Cynthia, about how, you know, like community engagement is about building relationships, and building relationships takes time. And I'm wondering if either you or Shey could speak to what it's like working cross-sector with different partners who might have different time frames, or like their sense of a timeline for a project.
Sorry, I like kept unmuting and muting myself. Yeah, I'm just thinking of like building relationship. Actually, to give an example, during our call for art process, you know, people may have a different timeline, but also an idea of how to go about it. So like I mentioned, in our advisory committee, originally we had a lot more engagement at the beginning, and then it kind of dwindled down or went away in some way because people got busy. So, and it, you know, a real like life example during our call for our process, we had people who were not engaged for a while come back and be like, hey, I'm part of the committee. I want to have a voice in the decision making. So a lot of it was also having that more one-on-one individual conversations of explaining everything again and being able to hear them out on that piece. Many, especially with residents or anybody, a lot of things are happening. We're in the middle of a pandemic. Many people have lost a lot in different ways. And one thing we decided, we had that conversation in the beginning, do we wanna kind of pause this project? And then once we can then come back and have a party outside, you know, in other words, do we wanna continue? But we realized that many of our many of our advisory committee, they were so excited to finally see, after, you know, 3 years of planning, finally see some art being installed. So we decided, let's continue, let's do this. So we definitely shifted a lot of our engagement work has been in person, you know, a lot of gathering together with food and music and really building the relationships and culture that way. And really being able to adjust. But I think for the big one is, well, the time frame, being able to understand where they're at and really just have a really sincere and open communication really has helped us. Definitely frustrating, is definitely time consuming and hard, like any relationship, you know, that you may have. But when it comes to this, I think that going back to the mission of what's really this is about. This is about creating a space to celebrate the Puerto Rican culture. You know, like that also kind of helps you, like, this is what we're working together for.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that, that part of the decision to not stop the project or not pause it is the fact that now more than ever, it's important to pay artists and to like help artists, you know, have funds and commission their work. And also this gives us, this would give us a little bit more time to build our relationship with the artists as well, even though it's virtual. But that was also part of it, like Cynthia was saying, like really the relationship piece being really important. The other piece of it was that Del Corazon, they did a spectacular job pivoting during COVID and like, you know, holding it down with still having virtual meetings while, you know, the heart of the community work that they all do has been in person. But, you know, the folks in the advisory committee are folks that are grassroots and they have strong connections in their own neighborhoods. So they've been helping us reach out to folks and advising us how to best, you know, show up and communicate. And part of what Cynthia was saying too is like, what's important is not imposing a way on people, like not imposing your way of what you need in this moment, or not imposing a requirement to come to meetings, or just, you know, it's just, you have to be flexible because of the really tender moment in which we are in. So, you know, folks have been really amazing. They've had to step back in some occasions to take care of their family, but then they have circled back and said like, yes, great, let's pick the artists, let's move this forward. So that flexibility that Cynthia has spoken about has been super important to us.
Thank you. Thank you both. Now we're going to go over to Melrose, Denise and Kris.
Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me and Kris Rodolico from Melrose to participate in this meeting today. I'm really pleased to be here and to introduce and explain our wayfinding and creative placemaking initiative. And I wanted to start with this slide just because this is a really nice depiction of one of the biggest events in Melrose. For those of you who are not familiar with Melrose, this is our what we call our Victorian Fair. And it's a very popular event. Obviously, we won't be holding it this year, unfortunately, but it brings thousands of people into the downtown of Melrose. And this is a really nice depiction of the downtown and the architectural, the architecture that sort of reflects the Victorian heritage of Melrose, and also the community spirit, just with the amount of people that come to patronize the booths, which are promoting the local businesses and local community organizations. Just a little bit of background on our initiative. We received a grant to develop a wayfinding system, and with the funding that we received, we decided instead of just doing highlighting a traditional kind of signage and wayfinding program, we also wanted to take some of these funds and promote placemaking and public art. So we've set aside about $30,000 for public art installations. And I'll get to that in a little bit, in a few moments. But because we were interested in broadening our perspective, we put out the RFP and hired Selbit Perkins Design and the Civic Space Collaborative. It was really important to us to have a very collaborative and expansive community engagement process. So we wanted to make sure we had a team that was focused on that side of things. Our project just kicked off several months ago, so we haven't been involved in it for that long. Only since the beginning of March. And of course, right around the time when we were pivoting to lockdown. So we had to also pivot our approach in terms of community engagement. And all of our engagement activities thus far have happened virtually. And which is not what we were originally intending, and it hasn't been ideal, although I will say, I think it's been helpful that I think, especially in the earlier months, people were really looking for ways to engage while they were stuck at home. And I think as a result, we got tremendous interest in some of our engagement activities. Just kind of quickly, just definitions. These are technical definitions, but for us, we were trying to balance the two objectives. We wanted to create a wayfinding system, which is really a fancy word for signage that helps people to sort of navigate, residents and visitors to navigate through the city and make connections to spaces and assets that they may not know much about. And then placemaking, so how we can help to enhance our public spaces through public art. And so those were sort of our overarching goals. Again, goals for this initiative, we wanted to do some visioning with the community around what makes great public spaces. We wanted to expand the public art offerings in Melrose. Melrose has an incredible array of artists and a really strong artistic community, but we don't have a lot by way of public art. So we really thought it would be important and it would be a great opportunity to try to promote that. We also have a brand new mayor, and when he was running for office, this was one of his platforms, was to provide more opportunities for public art. So we're excited that we're able to do that through this initiative. We're also looking at ways to enhance customer and visitor experience in all of our business districts, including our downtown, and that's especially important these days with the pandemic and with the local businesses struggling. We wanted to make sure that we were helping them in any way we could. And we want to create more supportive environments to encourage alternative means of transportation, particularly walking and cycling. So in terms of community engagement, we had many different prongs to our approach, but the underlying piece was the creation of an advisory committee. We have about a dozen people on the advisory committee, and this committee was established in order to advise us throughout the process. So we have representatives, of course, from the planning department and from various city departments like the Public Works Department and the mayor's office. We also have representatives from the business community, including the local Chamber of Commerce, the executive director, and some local business owners. We have members of our mobility community, including our bicycle and pedestrian committee, and our Mass in Motion representative. And we have our artists and representatives from the artistic community on our advisory committee. So we started out by doing a series of interviews individually with all of the committee members. And then, as I mentioned, we have been meeting regularly with the committee, and they've been advising us throughout. We also did a series of focus groups. We created 3 different focus groups, 3 different type of stakeholder groups. And those representing community stakeholders, civic officials, and arts and culture leaders. We wanted to tap into as broad a constituency as we could, including people that represent the senior community and also youth leaders, people who represent preservation and mobility, and of course the arts community. So some of the topics of conversation in these detailed focus groups were getting their input on ideal locations for placemaking and improved signage, other civic goals that we could achieve through the process, and how we could help and be a positive influence during the pandemic, and how to address the changing state of Melrose, with regard to diversity and racial justice. So it's, those were some of the key topics of conversation that we had with the focus groups. And again, the really nice thing about tapping into so many people like this is that when it came time to do our survey tool, we had a network. We had all of these individuals who were now stakeholders, and they had all of their networks to disseminate the survey to. So we created a really robust survey and put it out to the community in an online format for about a week in early May, and we got tremendous response, about 639 respondents. So we're really pleased with the kind of response that we got to our survey. And we collected a range of opinions and perspectives on issues related to wayfinding and to public art. I don't have a picture of the survey in these slides, but you can go onto the city's website and see an example, because it was designed in a very engaging way, much like the one that we just saw for Holyoke. It had a lot of great depictions of different types of art that people could rank and prioritize. And we got some really great information from that survey tool. And that survey
just letting you know, Denise, that you're approaching 9 minutes.
Okay, great. So these are some of the key findings from the survey. I also just want to mention that we had a community meeting that was also a virtual community meeting, but we had some great participation in that and got some really nice feedback on some of the wayfinding options that we're considering. And also, I guess the final piece of this is, well, I want to point out too, this is kind of a fun word cloud that came out of this survey. And sort of the final piece of this is the call for art. We have put out a call for art, and we identified a number of different public spaces and some project amounts. And we got about 22 proposals from that effort, and 9 artists have been selected, ranging from artwork related to murals and sculpture and utility boxes. We're really excited to get that next phase of the project going, and we've collaborated with Follow Your Arts, who's going to speak in a moment, Kris, and they're going to help us with the next phase in terms of the communication with the artists. And I have to say, it would have been impossible for us to do this project if we didn't have a partner like Follow Your Art Community Studios in order to work with. So we're really excited about this next phase, and I'll turn it over to Kris.
Thank you. I will be brief. Just first, so Follow Your Art Community Studios is a nonprofit community art center in Melrose. We are just coming up on our 1-year birthday, so this has been quite a year. It started out, we built off of a private business that I held for about 11 years in Melrose, and so that's kind of where we came from. And I'm losing my screen, I apologize. No, I'm fine. So for us to be able to partner with the city in this way has come at a really great time. The way we engage traditionally with the community is by getting people to come into our building. Denise, if you don't mind going to the next slide, please. This is our mission. It's a little small, but hopefully you can read it. It's also on our website. That picture is a picture of part of our big yellow house on Main Street, which we're very happy to live in. And our goal is to build creative community within Melrose and the surrounding areas. The way we traditionally do that is by having workshops, events, inviting people into our space. Now that we can't do that temporarily, we are looking for more ways to engage with the community, and by doing that through creative partnerships, that's really the key way that we're able to engage. So if you could go, Denise, to the next slide. Through the history of community studios, being a private business, the ways that we have tried to collaborate with the community and engage with the community in the past has always been through partnerships with community groups, organizations that are already established and have a dedicated group of community members who are involved with them. So for example, doing community projects with the Melrose Chamber of Commerce, with the Melrose Alliance Against Violence, Melrose Arts and Melrose Open Studios. These are all small organizations or committees or groups of people in Melrose that are dedicated to not just their mission, but also really engaging the community. And so our goal has been to try to find ways to build creativity and build creative projects into and supporting their missions. Also through the City of Melrose, the Human Rights Commission, Melrose Birth to 5, which is another Melrose committee, and with Denise with the Office of Planning. being able to find creative ways to use those partnerships to reach more people, especially at a time when it's hard to get in front of people, and it's hard to let people know kind of what we would like to do in terms of building creative community. And Denise, if you would just go to the last slide, these last two slides are just photos and images of community projects that we've done in the past with our community partners. And we're very excited about the opportunity to work with the city on the public art initiative. And it will be another way for this new and hopefully growing community art space to reach out and connect, not just with public artists who are going to be doing the work of the pieces that we've selected, but also getting that connection to the community and facilitating community connection between the artists and the greater community at Melrose through art connections. So that's our hope, and we're really excited about it.
Thank you so much, Denise and Kris. If folks have questions for the Melrose participants, feel free to drop them in either the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them after Merrimack Valley goes. And so, Marquise, Nate, and Karen, welcome. Thank you for hanging in there with us. Yeah, and so I feel like we heard from different folks practicing community engagement at different scales, and you're working at a regional scale. So it'll be really great to hear what that experience has been like.
Yep, so Nate's sharing his screen here. Thank you, Nate. So very quickly, I am the program director for the Essex County Community Foundation's Creative County Initiative. In Essex County, we have 34 communities, and this project deals with 15 of the 34 communities across the Merrimack Valley. We are in partnership with the Barr Foundation, along with 4 other community foundations across the state. You may have heard of this project, their Creative Commonwealth project. We are, fortunately, one of those community foundations engaged with Barr for a multi-year deep investment into the arts and culture of our communities. Part of our theory of change, starting in on this project 3-4 years ago, was that with cross-sector involvement and awareness of what arts and culture do for communities, the arts and culture sector will be elevated and better supported. Part of what we're doing, this is just one project of many projects within Creative County, is to introduce cultural planning to all of the 34 communities of Essex County. We had a series of cultural planning labs or workshops two winters ago, and many representatives from the planning and arts community attended those. And this is a project this is the first tangible project that spun out of it. 2 groups in the Merrimack Valley came to us and said, cultural planning theory and all of that is great. What can we do to actually put it in action and start something? So we decided to work with the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission. Nate will talk from that point of view, and with Elevated Thought as our artist partner. We had, of course, originally intended to have this be in-person convenings across the Merrimack Valley in May and June of this year, and we went to a virtual platform for obvious reasons. What it is community-generated cultural planning and cultural mapping. So this really is the mapping project. We consider culture very, very broadly, and we named it Merrimack Valley Place and Meaning because of this specific time in our history, in our shared history. And we really wanted to have the places as well as the meaning of those places come to the surface in the 2 different aspects of the project. So the 2 different aspects, Nate is going to introduce the first one, which is the digital map that MVPC as a regional planning board is managing and that they created. And then Marquise, from the artistic point of view, will talk about the expression book. So I'm just going to hand it over to Nate, and he can take it away from here.
Great. Thanks, Karen. And it's been really amazing just listening to all the different projects throughout the state. Kudos to you. Thanks to everybody dropping links in the chat too. I've been clicking around and exploring. I went on a Google map tour of Holyoke while you were all walking through the project, but it's really cool stuff. So as Karen kind of gave the broad level introduction there, this was our first foray into cultural planning in our region. This is as a job, I'm a community and economic development professional. I typically work kind of like on standard community and economic development things, which is, business retention, recruitment, and help with zonings and master plans and things of that nature, which all have to do with cultural planning, but always kind of at a secondary level. So this is our first attempt at really doing some intentional cultural planning work in our region. It was an opportunity for us to map the spaces, the places, and the activities that have value and that turn our communities into homes and neighborhoods for the folks who live there. Sharing what is meaningful to folks in our community has been able to inform all of our processes, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So just kind of really quickly, taking a look at the map we were able to develop, working with different stakeholders throughout the region, we were able to identify 150 different assets in our region. And if you were to take a look at kind of like which communities participated, it actually resembles kind of like a population density of our region. So for folks who don't know, the Merrimack Valley, the population centers, you can kind of see clustered right there on the map, with Haverhill, Lawrence, and Methuen kind of leading the way, and then the other communities, which are far more rural, tapering off. And we found that our results reflected that. We had categorized all of the different assets that we mapped into different classes, whether there was a store, whether there was a stage, a gallery, a food establishment, a historical site, a museum, a park. And we were able to kind of then give them different typography, different symbolism, and then you can filter them out, and you can do a lot of really cool things with the data, taking a look at what different assets are in different communities. Another question we asked folks is how they get to these places. And we found actually that a surprising amount walk. And Merrimack Valley is not the most walkable community in Massachusetts. We have some very rural areas, and even our more urban areas are still very car-centric. So for me as a planner, I was really encouraged and excited to see that a lot of these assets that people identified in their neighborhoods were places that they walk to, not necessarily drive to, which makes sense. I want to actually share with you the map just to kind of give you a tangible feel of what we're working with. Can folks see that okay? So this is what I had on my end, which is the cultural asset map. And I found this really useful. As a planner, I have maps of everything. I spend a lot of time around maps. I have infrastructure maps and sewer maps and zoning maps and business maps. And I have all this information that we do community planning work with. But in none of those kind of data sets and none of those maps do we have something that maps the places that are meaningful, the places that are important to people in these neighborhoods. And that's challenging because it's oftentimes intangible and it's difficult to categorize. But this is what I think the power in this exercise was it was a crowdsourcing of those places that are important to folks. So for instance, a good example, and I live in Haverhill, so I'm going to pick on Haverhill a little bit here. From the aerial view, this looks like a giant parking lot, which it is. It's a giant parking lot right smack down in our downtown. But we had a few different entries here, and when you click on them, you'll see that it's a parking deck, but it's a place that hosts different cultural and placemaking events like BuzzFest, Better Block. It hosts a weekly farmers market. It actually adds a lot of color and vibrancy. It's a destination for a lot of folks in this region. So as a planner, what this tells me and what this tells our planning stakeholders throughout the region is that though this is a parking lot, this is actually a gathering place in the community. This is actually a destination. It's a functional piece of infrastructure, not just as a parking lot, but as a community gathering space in our region. So if we're thinking about redeveloping, or if we're thinking about how do we, use the space differently, we should be taking into consideration those different uses that the community has for those sorts of spaces, which leads us to protecting these events and these spaces in a different way than maybe we were thinking of before, preserving them and expanding them and directing resources to them. So from my perspective, this is very useful, and we're already using it in a number of different ways. And I'm going to turn it over to Marquise really quickly. But before I transition, kind of the ways tangibly we've been using this information since gathering it is we have a active transportation plan we're working on. And for those not in the planning sphere, it's the guiding document which directs investments towards biking paths, protected bike lanes, walking trails, and it takes a look at our whole region and sees, what are the barriers to kind of pedestrian-oriented transportation, to non-car-oriented transportation, how can we direct resources there? So we typically use different sort of data sets to analyze and prioritize where we direct those investments, but we've recently integrated our cultural data, especially considering that 25% of these different assets and communities people are walking to. So how do we incorporate that into kind of our outlook of where we direct investments, and how do we protect and preserve and increase accessibility to these areas which people are going to? So that is, from my angle, the cultural asset map that we put together at MVPC. And before things keep popping in my head, it's live, it's a living map. So this isn't a static image, it's not a piece of paper. This is something that's open and can constantly be edited. And we're consistently going to put this out to our communities to help grow it, because 150 assets is a great start, but we want to see that at 500, or we want to see it at 1,000. We want to see how that grows over time and how people use spaces differently over time. So I'll turn it over to you, Marquise.
Thank you, Nate. Yeah, I want to echo your sentiment. Shout out to everybody on this call, sharing their work, some really inspiring work. Grateful to be on here. Yeah, so our role, Elevated Thought, first of all, I'm Marquise Victor, founding executive director at Elevated Thought based in Lawrence. We're an art and social justice organization. So, like Karen mentioned, we had to pivot in light of COVID. So the idea moved towards creating a book for each community. And I'm just gonna, if it's cool, can I share my screen real quick?
Yeah, take it away. Let me switch it over to you.
Okay.
You should be good.
Use this as a little backdrop. One moment, please. Yeah, we'll go desktop. We'll go right here. All right, y'all see that? All right, so that's a digital rendering of Lawrence, shape of Lawrence. So essentially we have these cultural assets, and we wanted to do a deeper dive into what does it all mean for individuals? What kind of stories are people trying to relay when they're saying, hey, this place is meaningful, I have a history here. How can we bring to light some of the narratives in these communities, and also how can we connect these communities that in some cases so close together, but so very, very disconnected. I'm sure some of y'all live in communities like that. So we wanted to leverage this project as a way to highlight the beauty, the culture, and the diversity and the meaning in each of these communities, and have other folks in different communities be able to have access to that, to be like, hey, I didn't know they had that in Lawrence, I want to go check it out. And build relationships, build conversations. And as you can see here in this design, there's a river that goes to it, it's Merrimack River, and there's a body of water that is, if not running directly through some of these communities, they're on the outskirts or on the side, they're very close by, and there's a long history to that as well. So Karen reached out to members of each of the communities, 15 communities, and we decided, hey, we're gonna pay artists to submit a piece of artwork that represents something that's meaningful for them in their community. And Elevated Thought, our team of young artists, and artist mentors are going to collect these submissions and cut them up into chapters. So some of the communities that didn't have a lot of submissions, they're grouped together, but a community like Lawrence, they have their own chapter full of submissions. And we're going to, you know, there's going to be a digital book, but it's also going to be a book that's going to be printed out and sent to each community, and they can find a proper location for it. Ideally, you know, a place like Lawrence, this book is going to go to the Lawrence Public Library, so the community has access to it. And, you know, through this project, through this process, shout out to Tom Borup, a consultant from Minneapolis, who's been a big key in developing this whole entire process. He's going to help us do a deeper dive and see how we can connect the different meanings for each community, so we can bring that to light as well. Additionally, we're looking to highlight each community through a video project, a short, small video that connects poetry from a submission from one of these communities, that then can have a visual counterpart with different parts of the communities that are part of this project. I just want to bring this up right here because I'm biased. This is a submission from a youth artist, Michelle Colado from Lawrence, and she's part of Elevated Thought too. So again, I'm a little biased, but this is going to be part of the book. It's going to be 10 by 10, and yeah, I don't want to take up too much time. I know we're running, so that was kind of swift recap, but if you have any questions, you can reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, Nate, and Marquise. So we do have a question. It's for Melrose, but I wonder if other folks can also speak to it. So what was a piece of advice or best practice for engaging the community through a virtual platform?
Lots of emails to people you know on the ground. And
yeah, I mean, yeah,
I was going to say, we did a lot of sharing through networks. So we relied a lot on our personal connections and networks, and making use of the focus groups, like Denise said, and asking people to share within Facebook, local community groups, that kind of thing.
And then I would just add, making the presentation interactive.
Mm-hmm.
It was interactive because that's what it would have been like if we were in person. We would have had a lot of, you know, interactive tools. So we tried to engage the people that were participating in our virtual meeting, for example, in an interactive way, to vote on different options. And
so did participants like raise their hand using a feature, or like just put their comments into the chat box while the meeting was going on?
How did we do that? I'm trying to remember.
Did have a couple of hand raises, or it wasn't, I'm sorry, it wasn't a hand raise. I don't remember how Adrian did it, but people could click on a choice.
Yeah, we were able to tally.
There was an automatic tally, but I don't know how to do it. I just know that's what happened.
All right, so there was that virtual interactive component.
Yeah.
And there's actually, oh, I see Louise put the 15 communities. Oh, sorry, Marquise put it. So you can take a look at which Merrimack Valley communities were a part of Place and Meaning. And Marquise, like, I really loved how you said how, like, these are places that are meaningful to people. And I think, you know, when you focus on trying to elicit responses around what places have meaning to you, that gives you like an emotional and relational and cultural landscape of a place, rather than just like a map of static places. So thank you so much to the Merrimack Valley folks for sharing that project with us. And Marquise, could you remind me, like, when is that digital book coming out?
Yeah, so our goal is to wrap it up by the end of the month.
Okay, great. So we'll make sure to feature that through our social media channels once it's available. And I know everyone has, well, I have a lot more questions and I could go into this discussion more, but we're out of time. So thank you to our guest speakers so much for joining us today and for sharing their experiences and their wisdom around community engagement. And thank you everyone who attended today, taking time out of your afternoon to join us. We are recording this session and we'll have it up on our YouTube page, the Mass Cultural Council's YouTube page, and we'll also send everyone notes from the session as well. So you'll get the notes and a link to the recording. All right, take care everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you.